The dust-covered stranger rode into Nathaniel Dawson's failing ranch on a hot summer afternoon in 1871. Her honey-colored hair tied back beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and her green eyes squinting against the glare of the Wyoming sun. Rebecca Wilson dismounted with ease, her worn leather saddlebags slung over one shoulder as she approached the dilapidated farmhouse. Nathaniel, 30 years old and with more worry lines than a man his age should carry, watched her approach with a mixture of curiosity and wariness that came from years of frontier living in Sheridan County. "Your fence posts are sinking," were her first words to him, spoken matter-of-factly as she pointed to the sagging eastern boundary of his property. "And your soil's gone gray. No wonder nothing's growing right." Nathaniel's weather-beaten face hardened. "I don't recall asking for your opinion, miss. And I don't recall offering it for free," she replied, extending a hand that was calloused from years of farm work. "Rebecca Wilson, I've come about the advertisement you posted in Sheridan. Land manager wanted, experience necessary." Nathaniel stared at her hand for a long moment before taking it reluctantly. "Nathaniel Dawson, and I was expecting a man. My father taught me everything he knew about farming in California before he passed. I managed our family's 200 acres for 5 years after. Now I'm here." She glanced around at the parched land, the sickly cattle, and the wind-damaged outbuildings. "And from the looks of it, you need me more than I need this job." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. 5 years of drought, poor harvests, and dwindling cattle herds had nearly broken him. His ranch, once the pride of eastern Wyoming territory, was slipping away despite his stubborn refusal to admit defeat. "I can't afford to take chances on unproven methods," he said. Rebecca nodded toward the withered cornfield. "And how's the proven method working for you, Mr. Dawson?" The question hung between them as the hot Wyoming wind kicked up dust around their boots. Nathaniel looked away first, his pride warring with desperation. "1 month," he finally said. "You've got 1 month to show me something worth keeping you on for." Rebecca's smile was brief but genuine. "I'll need my own room, fair wages, and your word that you'll at least try the techniques I suggest before dismissing them. Your room's in the back of the house. Wages depend on results, and I'll listen, but I make no promises beyond that." "Fair enough." Rebecca adjusted her saddlebags. "I'll get settled, then we can start with those fence posts." As she walked toward the house, Nathaniel called after her. "Miss Wilson, what makes you think you can save land that's been fighting me for 5 years?" Rebecca turned, the setting sun casting her face in golden light. "Because the land isn't your enemy, Mr. Dawson. You just haven't learned how to be its friend." Nathaniel watched her disappear into his home, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or taken the first step toward saving everything he'd worked for. The first week passed in a blur of arguments and compromises. Rebecca rose before dawn each day, studying the land and making detailed notes in a leather-bound journal. She tested soil samples, examined the failing crops, and assessed the health of the struggling cattle herd. "Your water management is all wrong," she declared over breakfast on the 8th day, spreading a hand-drawn map across the kitchen table. "You're drawing from the creek at the wrong point, and the irrigation ditches are too shallow to be effective during drought seasons." Nathaniel glowered at her over his coffee cup. "Those ditches were dug by my father and his father before him. And they worked fine when rainfall was plentiful and the herd was half the size," Rebecca countered. "But times change, Mr. Dawson. The land changes. And what do you suggest?" he asked, his voice tight with the effort of maintaining civility. "We need to redirect the main channel here," she pointed to a spot on her map, "and deepen the secondary ditches by at least 2 feet. The water table is lower than it was in your father's day." Nathaniel studied the map, his brow furrowed. That's weeks of work. Yes, it is, Rebecca agreed. I'll need to hire some help from town. With what money? Nathaniel scoffed. I'm barely keeping this place afloat as is. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. I have some savings. Consider it an investment in my future here. Your future? Nathaniel set down his cup with more force than necessary. You're mighty confident for someone who's only been here a week. Confidence comes from knowledge, Mr. Dawson, something your land has been trying to teach you for years. The words stung, but Nathaniel couldn't deny the truth in them. He'd been fighting a losing battle against nature instead of working with it. Fine, he relented. Hire the men, but I'll pay them myself. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. How? Nathaniel stood, reaching for his hat. I've got a prized stallion I've been saving for breeding. He'll fetch enough to cover the labor costs. You're willing to sell your best horse. I'm willing to invest in my future too, Miss Wilson. He headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. And you can call me Nate. Mr. Dawson makes me feel like my father. A small smile played at the corners of Rebecca's mouth. Then you should call me Rebecca, or Becca, as my father did. Rebecca, Nathaniel nodded, tipping his hat slightly before stepping out into the morning light. 3 days later, the first team of workers arrived from Sheridan. Under Rebecca's direction, they began rerouting the creek water into the new, deeper irrigation channels. Nathaniel worked alongside them, his shirt soaked with sweat as he dug through the hard, packed earth. You've got good instincts, he admitted grudgingly as they paused for water at midday. The land does seem to slope naturally this way. Rebecca handed him a dipper of cool water from the bucket. Your grandfather knew it too. See those old stone markers along the ridge. Those were boundary stones for the original irrigation system. Nathaniel shaded his eyes, looking toward the distant markers he'd never paid much attention to before. How do you know that? I found some old papers in your desk drawer when I was looking for blank paper for my notes. Hope you don't mind. You went through my desk. Nathaniel's voice rose slightly. I went looking for paper, Rebecca corrected, and found history instead. Your grandfather kept detailed records of the land. You should read them sometime. Nathaniel took another long drink, considering her words. My father never mentioned any records. Maybe he never read them either, Rebecca suggested gently. Sometimes the answers we need have been right in front of us all along. That evening, after the workers had departed for town, Nathaniel found himself in his father's old study, digging through dusty record books and yellowed maps. Rebecca brought him a lamp and a plate of food, setting them beside him without comment before returning to her own work in the kitchen. Near midnight, Nathaniel emerged, holding a leather-bound journal similar to Rebecca's own. You were right, he said, his voice filled with wonder and regret. My grandfather documented everything: soil conditions, rainfall patterns, crop rotations. Methods my father abandoned for quicker yields that ultimately depleted the soil. Rebecca looked up from her calculations. Your grandfather was a forward-thinking man, and I'm an obstinate fool who nearly lost everything because I was too proud to adapt. Nathaniel sank into a chair across from her. Not a fool, Rebecca corrected. Just a man doing the best he could with what he knew. Their eyes met across the table, something unspoken passing between them for the first time. Thank you, Nathaniel said simply. Rebecca nodded, returning to her work, but Nathaniel noticed the slight flush that colored her cheeks. As April gave way to May, the ranch slowly began to transform. The new irrigation system brought life, giving water to areas that had been parched for years. Rebecca introduced crop rotation plans and soil amendments that her father had developed in California's challenging climate. My father was considered eccentric, she explained as they planted alfalfa in a field that had previously grown only corn. He believed in treating the soil as a living thing, not just dirt to be exploited. Nathaniel watched her hands as they gently covered the seeds with earth. "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was, stubborn too. Rebecca glanced at him with a knowing smile. "You would have either been best friends or worst enemies. Given my track record with stubborn, knowledgeable farmers, I'd say friends was more likely," Nathaniel replied, surprising himself with the ease of the banter. Rebecca laughed, a sound that Nathaniel realized he'd been hearing more frequently as the days passed. It was a pleasant sound, honest and full-bodied, like everything else about her. By mid-June, the first results of their efforts were becoming visible. The alfalfa field was a sea of purple blossoms, buzzing with honeybees. The cattle were healthier, grazing on improved pastures where Rebecca had introduced drought-resistant grass varieties. "I've been meaning to ask," Nathaniel said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "How did you end up in Sheridan? California's a long way from Wyoming territory." Rebecca was silent for a moment, her eyes on the distant mountains. "After my father died, there wasn't much left for me in California. The drought hit us hard, and the neighboring farms were all owned by a wealthy landowner who wanted our water rights. He offered to buy me out, but the price was insulting. So you sold anyway and came east." "No," Rebecca's jaw set in a way that Nathaniel had come to recognize as her stubborn look. "I refused to sell, and suddenly found myself facing mysterious cattle deaths, broken fences, and intimidation from his hired men. When our barn burned down, I knew I had to leave before worse happened." Nathaniel's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "That's criminal behavior." "It's business in some parts," Rebecca said matter-of-factly. "I sold to a family friend for less than it was worth, but enough to start fresh somewhere else. I saw your advertisement in a newspaper that was wrapping some supplies I bought in Cheyenne." "Lucky coincidence for me," Nathaniel said softly. Rebecca turned to him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. "Was it luck, I wonder, or providence?" The question lingered between them as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. July brought both blessings and challenges. The improved irrigation system saved many of the crops during a brief dry spell, but then came rumors of rustlers operating in the area. Several neighboring ranches had lost cattle, and tension was high in Sheridan County. "We should bring the herd closer to the ranch house," Nathaniel suggested after returning from town with news of another theft. Rebecca frowned. "The south pasture doesn't have enough grazing to support them all." "Better hungry cattle than stolen ones." "Or," Rebecca countered, "we could implement the rotational grazing system I've been suggesting. Move smaller herds between different pastures, making them easier to monitor and protect." Nathaniel considered the idea. A month ago, he might have dismissed it outright, but he'd seen enough of Rebecca's methods succeed to give her the benefit of the doubt. "How quickly can we set it up?" Rebecca's expression brightened. "We can start tomorrow. I'll need help setting up some temporary fencing. I'll ride to the Tucker's place at first light. Their boys are always looking for extra work." True to his word, Nathaniel returned the next morning with the Tucker brothers, and by nightfall they had established the first of several smaller paddocks for the new grazing system. The following day, they divided the herd and placed the groups in different areas, with the most valuable breeding stock closest to the main house. Rebecca and Nathaniel took turns patrolling the property at night, rifles at the ready. During one such patrol, they encountered each other at the edge of the west pasture. "You should be sleeping," Nathaniel admonished. "You've been working since dawn." "So have you," Rebecca pointed out, "and I've been sleeping better these past few months than I have in years." Nathaniel leaned against a fence post, studying her in the moonlight. Is that so? Yes, she admitted. There's something about this land, your land, it feels right somehow. Our land, Nathaniel corrected quietly. Rebecca glanced at him sharply. What did you say? I said our land. Because that's what it's becoming, isn't it? You've put as much of yourself into it as I have these past months. The air between them seemed to still, charged with something neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. Nate, Rebecca began, but was interrupted by the sound of a distant gunshot, both of them tensed, instantly alert. North pasture, Nathaniel said, already moving. The yearlings. They ran to the barn where their horses were stabled, mounting quickly and riding hard toward the sound. As they crested a small hill, they saw 3 men on horseback attempting to separate several cattle from the main group. Rustlers, Nathaniel growled, reaching for his rifle. Wait, Rebecca cautioned. They're armed and there are 3 of them. This is my land, Nathaniel said grimly. I'm not letting them take a single head. Before Rebecca could argue further, Nathaniel fired a warning shot into the air. The rustlers immediately scattered, 2 heading east while the 3rd turned his horse directly toward Nathaniel and Rebecca, gun raised. Get down. Nathaniel shouted, pushing Rebecca from her saddle just as a shot cracked through the night. They tumbled to the ground together as their horses reared and bolted. Nathaniel returned fire, and the rustler veered away, disappearing into the darkness after his companions. For several tense moments they lay still, listening for any sign of the men's return. Are you hurt? Nathaniel finally asked, his voice rough with concern as he helped Rebecca to her feet. Just bruised, she assured him, brushing dirt from her clothes. The cattle. Nathaniel scanned the pasture. Looks like they didn't get any, but they'll be back. We should alert the sheriff in the morning. For all the good it will do, Nathaniel muttered. Sheriff Davis is spread thin as it is. They walked back toward the house, leading their retrieved horses, both shaken by the close call. At the porch steps, Rebecca turned to Nathaniel. Thank you, she said softly, for pushing me out of the way. Nathaniel's hand moved of its own accord, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I couldn't let anything happen to you. In the silvery moonlight, Rebecca's eyes searched his. Because you need me to save your ranch. Because Nathaniel hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Because you matter, Rebecca. To the ranch, yes, but to me as well. Rebecca's breath caught. For a moment, Nathaniel thought he'd overstepped, but then she placed her hand gently against his chest. You matter to me too, Nate, more than I expected. The confession hung between them, fragile and new. Nathaniel covered her hand with his own. It's late. We should both get some rest. Rebecca nodded, and they parted at the hallway that led to their respective rooms, each feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. The following weeks brought increased patrols and vigilance, but the rustlers did not return to the Dawson ranch. Perhaps word had spread that this particular property was well defended, or maybe they had moved on to easier targets. Regardless, the incident had drawn Nathaniel and Rebecca closer, their shared danger creating a bond that complemented their growing professional respect. August arrived with promising signs for the fall harvest. The corn stood tall and healthy, the vegetable garden flourished, and the cattle had regained their condition. Rebecca's methods were proving successful beyond even Nathaniel's cautious hopes. We should consider expanding the alfalfa fields next spring, Rebecca suggested as they inspected the crops one afternoon. The soil improvement is remarkable, and we can sell the excess as hay if we have a good yield. Nathaniel nodded, already mentally calculating the additional acreage they could convert. We'll need to hire more permanent help if we expand. The Peterson family in town has 2 sons looking for steady work. They're young but hardworking. You seem to have thought of everything, Nathaniel observed with a smile. Rebecca shrugged, but her eyes shone with quiet pride. Planning for the future is what farmers do. The future, Nathaniel repeated thoughtfully. A year ago, I wasn't sure this place had one. And now? Now I can see possibilities I couldn't before. His gaze rested on her face, making it clear he wasn't just talking about the land. Rebecca's cheeks colored slightly, but she held his gaze. I've been invited to the harvest dance in Sheridan next weekend, she said, changing the subject but not entirely. Mrs. Tucker extended the invitation when I was in town yesterday. Are you going? Nathaniel asked, trying to sound casual. I thought I might. It would be nice to celebrate the coming harvest with the community. She paused, then added, Will you be attending? I haven't been to a town dance in years, Nathaniel admitted. Not much cause for celebration recently. Perhaps it's time to change that, Rebecca suggested. We could go together, as colleagues. Nathaniel's heart quickened at the tentative offer. I'd like that, though I should warn you my dancing skills are rusty at best. Rebecca laughed, the sound carrying across the fields. I'm sure we can manage. After all, we've tackled harder challenges together. The night of the harvest dance arrived clear and pleasantly warm. Rebecca emerged from her room in a blue calico dress that Nathaniel had never seen before, her hair arranged in loose curls framing her face. You look beautiful, he said simply, standing awkwardly in the parlor in his best shirt and clean trousers. Thank you, Rebecca replied, her eyes taking in his own careful preparations. You clean up quite well yourself, Nate. They rode to town in the newly repaired buckboard, the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. The community hall in Sheridan was already lively with music and laughter when they arrived, lanterns glowing in the twilight. Mrs. Tucker greeted them at the door, her shrewd eyes noting their arrival together with evident approval. Rebecca, dear, and Nathaniel Dawson, I declare I haven't seen you at a social gathering since before the drought. Come in, come in. Inside, the hall was decorated with early harvest bounty corn stalks and wheat sheaves arranged artfully, tables laden with pies and cakes contributed by the women of the community. A small band played in the corner, several couples already dancing to a lively tune. Nathaniel. Good to see you, man, Sheriff Davis approached, clapping him on the shoulder. Heard you had some trouble with rustlers a while back. They tried, Nathaniel confirmed. Didn't get anything thanks to our vigilance. The sheriff nodded approvingly. Good to hear. They've been a real problem for Jensen and Miller over by the creek. His gaze shifted to Rebecca. This must be your land manager I've heard so much about. Madam, from what I gather, you've worked miracles on that place. Rebecca smiled. Nothing miraculous about hard work and good farming practices, Sheriff, though Nathaniel deserves equal credit for being willing to try new methods. Well, whatever you're doing, keep at it. Good to see the Dawson place thriving again. The sheriff tipped his hat and moved on to greet other arrivals. As the evening progressed, Nathaniel found himself relaxing into the community celebration in a way he hadn't for years. The drought and hard times had isolated him, but Rebecca's presence seemed to bridge the gap between him and his neighbors. May I have this dance? He asked during a waltz, offering his hand to Rebecca. She took it with a smile. I thought you claimed to be rusty. I am, he admitted as they moved onto the dance floor. But some things are worth the embarrassment of trying. His hand at her waist felt both right and thrilling as they began to move in time with the music. Despite his warnings, Nathaniel proved a capable dancer, leading Rebecca confidently through the steps. You lied to me, Nathaniel Dawson, Rebecca accused playfully. You dance quite well. My mother insisted on lessons when I was young, he confessed. said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like an injured buffalo. Rebecca laughed, drawing curious glances from nearby couples. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was, Nathaniel agreed, a hint of sadness tempering his smile. She would have liked you. The music slowed and their steps brought them closer together. Why do you say that? Rebecca asked softly. Because you don't let me get away with anything, Nathaniel replied, and because you see the value in things others might overlook. Their eyes met, and for a moment the crowded dance floor seemed to fade away. Then the music ended, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart to join the applause. Later, as they stood by the refreshment table enjoying punch and misses. Peterson's apple pie, Rebecca noticed Nathaniel watching a young couple dancing nearby. Penny for your thoughts, she asked. Nathaniel smiled slightly. I was just thinking about how things change. A year ago, I was ready to give up on the ranch, convinced I was fighting a losing battle alone. Now, Rebecca prompted when he trailed off. Now the land is recovering, the cattle are thriving, and I'm at a harvest dance with the most knowledgeable woman in the county, he finished, his tone light but his eyes serious. Hardly that, Rebecca demurred. You're too modest, Nathaniel insisted. Everyone here has noticed the difference in my place. Mrs. Tucker was telling me earlier that her husband is considering implementing some of your irrigation methods. Rebecca's eyes widened. Really? He seemed so skeptical when we first discussed it. Results speak for themselves, Nathaniel said simply, just as they did with me. As the evening drew to a close, they said their goodbyes and climbed into the buckboard for the ride home. The night had turned cool, and Nathaniel draped a blanket over their laps as they set off. Thank you for suggesting we come tonight, he said, looking at Rebecca's profile in the moonlight. I enjoyed myself more than I expected to. So did I, she admitted. It's nice to feel part of a community again. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels the only sounds. Above them, the Wyoming sky was ablaze with stars, clearer and brighter than Rebecca had ever seen in California. It's beautiful here, she murmured, gazing upward, in a harsh, demanding sort of way. Nathaniel followed her gaze to the star-strewn heavens. That's an apt description. This land doesn't give anything away for free. You have to earn its bounty. But when you do, the rewards are all the sweeter for it, Rebecca added. Nathaniel's hand found hers beneath the blanket, his touch warm and sure. Yes, he agreed quietly. They are. September brought the harvest and with it the tangible proof of their success. The corn yield was the best in 5 years. The vegetable garden produced enough to preserve for the winter months, and the hay was abundant enough to ensure the cattle would have feed through the cold season. We should celebrate, Nathaniel declared as they finished tallying the harvest figures. A special dinner, perhaps. Rebecca smiled at his enthusiasm. That sounds lovely. I could prepare something. No, Nathaniel interrupted. I mean, I appreciate the offer, but you've worked as hard as anyone. I thought perhaps. He hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic nervousness. Perhaps we could go to the hotel restaurant in Sheridan. I hear Mrs. Benson has hired a new cook from back east who's quite talented. Rebecca looked up from her ledger, surprised. Like a dinner engagement. Nathaniel's ears reddened slightly. Yes, if you'd like. I would, Rebecca said softly. Very much. The following evening they rode into Sheridan dressed in their best clothes. The hotel dining room was the finest establishment in the small but growing town, with white tablecloths and a small vase of wildflowers on each table. Mr. Dawson, what a pleasure, the maitre d' greeted them. It's been some time since we've had the honor of serving you. Thank you, Harold. Table for 2, please. They were seated by a window overlooking the main street, where the setting sun cast long shadows between the buildings. A waiter brought menus and filled water glasses with a flourish that made Rebecca smile. "This is lovely, Nate," she said, looking around the modestly elegant room. "Thank you for suggesting it." "It's the least I could do to properly mark our success," he replied, "and to thank you properly for everything you've brought to the ranch." Over a dinner of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables, some of which had actually come from their own garden, Rebecca noted with pride, they talked about the future. Plans for winter preparations, spring planting, and expanded livestock breeding filled their conversation with a shared sense of purpose and anticipation. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you," Nathaniel said as they lingered over apple tart and coffee. "Your initial agreement was for 1 month, which has long since passed." Rebecca's stomach tightened with unexpected anxiety. Are you unsatisfied with my work?" "Quite the opposite," Nathaniel assured her quickly. "I was hoping to formalize a more permanent arrangement." "Oh," Rebecca relaxed slightly. "You mean a long-term employment contract?" Nathaniel set down his coffee cup, his expression suddenly serious. "Not exactly, though that would be one option." "What other option did you have in mind?" Rebecca asked, her heart beginning to race at his tone. "A partnership," Nathaniel said carefully. "Legal and otherwise." Rebecca's breath caught as the implication of his words registered. "Nathaniel, are you—" "I'm not expressing myself well," he admitted, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Rebecca, these past months have transformed not just my land but my life. You brought knowledge, determination, and hope when I was sorely lacking all three. I find myself thinking not just about the next season or the next year, but about a future that stretches far beyond that. A future I can only imagine with you by my side." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "Nate, I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he continued quickly. "I know this might seem sudden, and you deserve time to consider what you truly want. All I ask is that you think about the possibility of building something permanent here with me." Rebecca blinked back her tears, a smile breaking through her emotion. "It doesn't seem sudden at all," she said softly. "It feels like the natural progression of everything we've been working toward together." Hope brightened Nathaniel's face. "Does that mean—" "It means I would be honored to build a future with you, Nathaniel Dawson, as your partner in every sense of the word." They returned to the ranch that night with a new understanding between them, a promise of shared tomorrows that made the familiar landscape seem fresh with possibility. By mutual agreement, they decided to wait until after the winter to formalize their engagement, giving them time to be certain of their feelings and to prepare for the changes a marriage would bring. Winter descended on the Wyoming territory with its usual ferocity, but the Dawson Ranch was better prepared than it had been in years. The barn was full of hay, the root cellar stocked with preserved vegetables, and the cattle healthy enough to withstand the cold months ahead. Inside the farmhouse, a different kind of warmth flourished. Rebecca and Nathaniel settled into a comfortable routine of shared meals, evening readings by the fire, and plans for the spring that now included a wedding. "We could plant flowers along the front path," Rebecca suggested one snowy evening as they sat side by side on the sofa, a quilt draped across their laps. "My mother always said a home should welcome visitors with color." "Whatever you want," Nathaniel agreed, his arm around her shoulders. "Though I hope you know, I intend for this to be your home in every sense. Any changes you wish to make to the house itself are welcome too." Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder. "It already feels like home. But I admit, I've had some ideas about expanding the kitchen and perhaps adding a proper dining room for when we entertain." Entertain, Nathaniel chuckled. Have I given the impression of being a social butterfly? No, but the successful rancher and his knowledgeable wife should be prepared to host neighboring farmers who want to learn our methods, Rebecca teased. We could become quite the agricultural advisors, you know. Nathaniel's expression softened at her use of our methods, and we. Despite the harsh weather outside, he couldn't remember a winter that had felt so full of warmth and promise. January brought a severe blizzard that tested their preparations. For 3 days, the wind howled around the farmhouse, driving snow into drifts taller than a man. When the storm finally broke, they emerged to find the landscape transformed into a glistening white expanse. The south pasture fence is down, Nathaniel reported after checking the property. And we've lost power to the smaller barn. Rebecca nodded, already calculating what needed to be done. We should check the cattle first, make sure none wandered through the broken fence. Working together, they located all the animals, repaired the fence, and restored the barn's coal heating system before nightfall. As they walked back to the house, exhausted but satisfied, Nathaniel stopped suddenly and turned to Rebecca. "Marry me now," he said, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Not in the spring, now." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "Now." "But we agreed to wait until—" "I know what we agreed," Nathaniel interrupted, taking her gloved hands in his. "But today showed me something important. Together we can handle whatever comes our way. I don't want to wait another 3 months to call you my wife." Rebecca studied his face, flushed with cold and earnestness. The pass to Sheridan might still be blocked from the storm, and the Reverend Judge Wilson comes through next week on his circuit, Nathaniel reminded her. He can perform the ceremony. "We can have a proper church blessing in the spring if you like, but I'm asking you to be my wife now, Rebecca Wilson. What do you say?" A slow smile spread across Rebecca's face. "I say yes, Nathaniel Dawson. I'll marry you next week or tomorrow if we could manage it." He pulled her close then, kissing her with all the warmth that had been building between them through the long winter evenings. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless despite the cold. "We should get inside before we freeze," Rebecca laughed, her cheeks pink with more than just the chill. "I don't feel cold at all," Nathaniel replied with a grin, but he led her toward the house anyway, their footprints leaving a single trail through the snow. True to his word, Judge Wilson performed the ceremony the following week in the Dawson farmhouse parlor. Mrs. Tucker and her husband stood as witnesses, along with Sheriff Davis and his wife. The judge pronounced them husband and wife just as the winter sun broke through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light through the windows. "I believe that's a good omen," Mrs. Tucker declared as she embraced the new Mrs. Dawson. "Sunshine on your wedding day means a bright future ahead." "Our future was already looking bright," Rebecca said, smiling up at her husband. "But I'll happily accept the extra blessing." The small gathering enjoyed a wedding dinner prepared by Mrs. Tucker and Mrs. Davis, with contributions from the Dawson root cellar. As their guests departed in the late afternoon, promising to spread the news of the marriage throughout Sheridan, Nathaniel and Rebecca stood arm in arm on the porch, watching the sun set on their wedding day. "Mrs. Dawson," Nathaniel said, testing the sound of it. "How does it feel?" Rebecca leaned against him, contentment filling her heart. "It feels right, like coming home after a long journey." "That's exactly it," Nathaniel agreed, leading her back inside to the warmth of their shared home. "You've come home and so have I." Spring arrived with its usual muddy enthusiasm, transforming the white landscape into a palette of greens and early wildflowers. The ranch awakened from its winter slumber, and with it came renewed activity and purpose. True to their plans, Nathaniel and Rebecca began expanding their operation, hiring the Peterson boys as permanent hands and implementing new crop rotations based on the previous year's success. Word of their methods had indeed spread through the county, bringing occasional visitors seeking advice. "The Millers are coming by tomorrow," Rebecca announced one evening in late April. "Elizabeth says her husband is finally ready to try the irrigation system we suggested." Nathaniel smiled from where he sat at the desk, reviewing their ledgers. "Convert one stubborn rancher and the rest eventually follow." "Speaking of stubborn ranchers," Rebecca said, moving to stand behind him and placing her hands on his shoulders, "the ledgers look good." "Better than good," Nathaniel agreed, covering one of her hands with his own. "If the summer weather holds, we'll show a real profit this year, enough to consider that dining room expansion you wanted." Rebecca leaned down to kiss his cheek. "I have something else I'd like to consider first." "Oh," Nathaniel turned in his chair to face her. "What might that be?" Rebecca took a deep breath, her eyes shining. "A nursery." For a moment Nathaniel stared at her, processing her words. Then understanding dawned, and he stood so quickly he nearly knocked over the chair. "Rebecca, are you saying?" She nodded, her smile radiant. "Doctor Matthews confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're going to have a baby, Nate. Sometime in late November, he thinks." Nathaniel gathered her into his arms, his joy too great for words at first. When he finally found his voice, it was thick with emotion. "A child, our child. The next generation of Dawsons to work this land," Rebecca said softly, resting her head against his chest. "Though I hope he or she will have an easier time of it than you did. With you as their mother, teaching them everything your father taught you, how could they not?" Nathaniel replied, his hand moving to rest gently against her still flat stomach. "Our child will understand from the beginning what took me years to learn, that the land is a partner, not an adversary." The summer of 1872 was kind to Sheridan County, with regular rainfall and moderate temperatures that allowed the crops to flourish. The Dawson Ranch became something of a local success story, with Nathaniel and Rebecca hosting several informal gatherings for neighboring farmers interested in their methods. As Rebecca's pregnancy progressed, she adjusted her activities, but remained actively involved in the ranch operations, training the Peterson boys in her techniques and keeping meticulous records for future reference. "You should be resting more," Nathaniel fretted one August afternoon as he found her in the vegetable garden, directing the younger Peterson boy in harvesting techniques. Rebecca straightened, one hand supporting her growing belly. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," she reminded him with a smile. "Besides, women have been working the land while carrying children since the beginning of agriculture." "Nevertheless," Nathaniel insisted, "there are plenty of hands to do the physical work now. Your job is to direct and teach, not bend and lift." Rebecca recognized the concern behind his protectiveness and relented slightly. "I promise I'm being careful, but this baby is half yours, which means it's probably as stubborn as its father and wouldn't appreciate too much inactivity." Nathaniel laughed, placing his hand on her belly just in time to feel a strong kick. "Point taken. He's definitely got spirit." Rebecca corrected with a mischievous smile, "mother's intuition." By October, preparations for both the baby and the winter were well underway. Rebecca had transformed the small bedroom adjacent to theirs into a nursery, while Nathaniel ensured the barns and outbuildings were fully repaired and insulated against the coming cold. "I've been thinking about names," Rebecca said one evening as they sat by the fire, her sewing basket beside her as she worked on a small blanket. "What do you think of William for a boy after my father?" Nathaniel nodded approvingly. "William Dawson has a good sound to it, and for a girl." "I was considering Margaret after your mother. Nathaniel's expression softened. She would have been honored, and thoroughly besotted with her grandchild, I have no doubt. As will we be, Rebecca said, setting aside her sewing to rub her aching back. Though I admit I'll be glad when he or she decides to make an appearance. November seems very far away at the moment. As it happened, their child was impatient to join the world. 2 weeks before the expected date, in the midst of the first snowfall of the season, Rebecca went into labor. It's too early, Nathaniel worried as he helped her to their bed. I should ride for the doctor. There's time yet, Rebecca assured him, though her face was tense with discomfort. First babies often come slow. Send young Peterson instead. You should stay with me. Nathaniel dispatched the boy to town with instructions to bring back Dr. Matthews as quickly as possible, then returned to Rebecca's side. As the hours passed and her labor intensified, Nathaniel felt increasingly helpless, able only to hold her hand and offer words of encouragement. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her as she gripped his hand through a particularly difficult contraction. "You've brought life back to barren land. Bringing our child into the world is just one more miracle you're capable of." Rebecca managed a strained smile between pains. Flatterer. But don't stop. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and Nathaniel found himself glancing anxiously toward the window, wondering if the doctor would be able to make it through. "The baby's coming whether Dr. Matthews is here or not," Rebecca said, reading his thoughts. "Women have been doing this without doctors since the beginning of time." "I'd still feel better if he were here," Nathaniel admitted, as if in answer to his concern they heard the sound of approaching horses. Moments later, Dr. Matthews bustled into the bedroom, snow still clinging to his coat. "Well now, Mrs. Dawson," he said briskly, setting down his medical bag. "Let's see how things are progressing, shall we?" With the doctor's experienced guidance, the labor continued through the afternoon and into the evening. Nathaniel remained steadfastly by Rebecca's side, his admiration for her strength and determination growing with each passing hour. Finally, as the grandfather clock in the parlor struck 9, their child announced its arrival with a lusty cry that filled the room. "Congratulations, Doctor," Matthews said, his voice warm as he placed a small bundle in Rebecca's arms. "You have a fine, healthy son." Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she looked at their child for the first time. "Hello, William," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Nathaniel leaned close, his own vision blurred with emotion as he took in the sight of his wife and son. The tiny face was red and wrinkled, with a surprising amount of dark hair plastered to his head. "He's perfect," Nathaniel said, his voice breaking. "You're both perfect, Doctor." Matthews busied himself with the necessary post-birth tasks, then prepared to depart, promising to return the following day to check on mother and child. "The snow's letting up," he informed them as he packed his bag. "Which is fortunate, as I suspect you'll have visitors once word spreads." Left alone with their new family, Nathaniel settled carefully on the bed beside Rebecca, his arm around her shoulders as they both gazed in wonder at their son. "I never imagined I could feel this way," he confessed softly. "When I placed that advertisement for a land manager, I was desperate to save my ranch. I never expected to find the other half of my heart." Rebecca leaned against him, exhausted but radiant. "And I came here seeking a fresh start, a place to use what my father taught me. I found that and so much more." She looked down at their sleeping son. "We found everything." The winter of 1872-1873 passed in a blur of midnight feedings, first smiles, and the countless tiny milestones that marked William's early months. Despite the cold and snow outside, the Dawson farmhouse had never felt warmer or more alive. By spring, William was a sturdy, curious infant who seemed to take in the world around him with the same thoughtful attention his parents gave to their land. Rebecca often carried him with her as she supervised the spring planting, pointing out the different crops and explaining their purposes, as though he could understand every word. "He'll be a natural farmer," Nathaniel observed one evening as he watched Rebecca rock their son to sleep. "He already loves being outdoors, with the best of both our knowledge to guide him," Rebecca agreed, "though I hope he'll feel free to choose his own path when the time comes." "Of course," Nathaniel nodded, "though I admit I like the idea of this land passing through generations of our family." Rebecca smiled at the thought. "Generations plural. Are you suggesting William might need siblings, Mr. Dawson?" Nathaniel's ears reddened slightly, but he met her teasing gaze with a steady one of his own. "I wouldn't be opposed to the idea, Mrs. Dawson, when the time is right." "Neither would I," Rebecca admitted softly. "This family we've created, it's more than I ever dared hope for." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The ranch continued to prosper under their combined expertise, becoming one of the most successful operations in Sheridan County. Their irrigation methods and crop rotation practices were eventually adopted by many neighboring farms, earning them a reputation as agricultural innovators in the territory. William grew into a thoughtful, capable boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's keen mind. When he was 4, he gained a sister, Margaret, whose arrival completed their family circle. On a warm summer evening in 1878, Nathaniel and Rebecca sat on their expanded porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over land that now flourished with abundance. "Do you ever think about California?" Nathaniel asked, taking Rebecca's hand in his. "Do you ever miss it?" Rebecca considered the question, her gaze moving from their children to the prosperous fields beyond. "Sometimes I think about my father's farm and what it might have become," she admitted. "But no, I don't miss it. This is where I belong, where we all belong." Nathaniel squeezed her hand gently. "When I think about how close I came to losing all this, not just the land, but the chance at this life with you and the children, it humbles me." "We saved each other," Rebecca said simply. "You gave me a place to belong when I needed one most, and I brought what knowledge I had to help heal your land." "You brought far more than knowledge," Nathaniel corrected, pulling her close. "You brought hope, Rebecca, and that made all the difference." As twilight deepened into dusk, William and Margaret raced up the porch steps, breathless with laughter and stories of their adventures. Together, the family went inside, closing the door on a land that had once teetered on the edge of failure, but now stood as testament to the power of knowledge, determination, and love to transform even the most challenging circumstances. The Dawson Ranch, once failing and nearly forgotten, had become not just a successful enterprise but the foundation of a legacy that would endure for generations to come, all because a determined woman with her father's wisdom had arrived just when she was needed most.